Is it recording? Good deal. All right. Chapter 29, we're going to at least get started on this. Support, protection, and movement. And this is going to be talking about vertebrates as well as invertebrates, from exoskeletons to endoskeletons, disadvantages and advantages, all the way through this chapter.
And where we at?
We're in chapter 29.
29.
Yeah.
And
And
page 647.
these chapters, I used to have to skip due to lack of time. Well, I skipped introductory chapters this time to do these, because these are way more pertinent to physiology and anatomy than those introductory chapters. So, in fact, we'll skip those in physiology too when we get there. So start on 648, look at 648, and we're gonna start with the invertebrate integument. This is our skin. The invertebrate integument has a lot of the same names as we do as far as skin goes: epidermis, cuticle. Do we have any cuticles? We have cuticles, don't we? The epidermis, the cuticle, down at the bottom. The arthropod integument consists of single-layered epidermis, more precisely called a hypodermis, which secretes a complex cuticle of two zones, a procuticle and an epicuticle. That's a lot of cuticle. But they're multi-layered. Are we multi-layered? We are, aren't we? So a lot of comparison. Now when you get into crustaceans, they call them decapod crustaceans. Decapod's a term you ought to hang on to, because in the lab we'll reference back to that. A crayfish is a decapod. Calcification of the shell. You ever picked up a crayfish? That old shell's hard, isn't it? You ever picked up one that has a soft shell? Anybody? No? Hadn't been out there crayfishing lately? Well, they go through molts, and when they go through a molt, which then they grow to the next stage, then the shell will harden to give them protection, and if they have to go through another growth stage, and they shed that, and then it starts soft, and they harden through calcification. And that's the disadvantage of exoskeletons, which it'll tell you a couple pages over, is to grow to the next stage, you have to shed the exoskeleton, grow the next stage, and then grow it back. Endoskeletons have this advantage. They grow with us. They're inside of us, used for storehouse, and grow with us as we go. So there are advantages and disadvantages. We don't have the hardened shell on the outside protecting us, so we're more vulnerable to outside illnesses or outside damage, if you will. But now they use the term sclerotization. Arthropod cuticle is one of the toughest materials because the sclerotin is part of it. You ever heard the term chitin? It's actually a sugar. Chitin is the main component of these exoskeletons, and it's a polysaccharide. Now you think, well, sugar, it can't be that tough. Well, it calcifies the sugar, and they use the term sclerotinized because that even makes it more resistant. That's more of a hardening coat. Here's how hard it is. Strongly resistant to pressure and tearing, and can withstand boiling in concentrated alkali. Yet it's very light, having a specific mass of only 1.3 times the weight of water. This is some tough stuff. Now we don't think much of it when we step on a grasshopper and it goes and it crunches. You say, well, he wasn't so tough, was he? Well, I mean, you're dropping 150 pounds on top of this little feller. No, he's not. That's like an elephant stepping on your endoskeleton. It goes crushed too, doesn't it? So, but for its purpose, these exoskeletons are amazingly tough and very withstanding of external influence. The integument and its derivatives, of course, the epidermis and dermis, keratinization is starting the hardening process, and then we get cornification in our skin. Do you have a cornified area of your skin? You ever had a callus? We got calluses on your toes if you walk. I mean, everybody has a callus somewhere, and that's what the cornified is. It's dead. Cornification is the hardening of dead cells, and it's going to happen in areas of use, heavy use, and even abuse. Some of you may write with a pencil enough that you have a callus where your pencils connect to your fingers a lot. Like, if you use your hands a lot, look at mechanics and farmers. They have calloused hands. I mean, you could use them as emery boards to use your hand to keep your, I mean, that's how tough some of these, they calcify because we're trying to build layers so we don't cut through the skin every time we use it and influence infection and things like that. So keratinization and cornification is mentioned there as well. Now moving on 649, they talk about how the skin is derivatives in a lot of animals to a lot of different things. Claws, beaks, nails, horns. These are all different forms or derivatives of skin. And I've even, in another chapter, they'll actually tell you it's modified hair in a lot of cases. Well, where does hair come from? Skin, right? Grows up out of the skin. Claws, beaks, nails, and horns. All different forms and modifications that come from the skin. More precise, maybe even modified hair. At the top of the next page, they tell you again that the epithelial layer, it has a germinative component responsible for the continual growth of horns, hooves, claws, and beaks. And it says continual growth. You ever think, well, why don't hooves get this long? Or why don't beaks get so long they can't hardly stand it? Well, they say it's just normal wear and tear and everyday activity, but I think at some point they slow growth or stop growing. Birds have specific beaks for what they do, so their beak's not going to get carried away and hang down to their knees, and that's all they can do is drag their beak around. So there's natural DNA. You okay? You got this imagination of a bad beaked bird attacking you. Yeah, nothing worse than a bad beaked bird. So that's what they're talking about. That, you know, yeah, on hooves, yeah, wear and tear is going to take care of it. It's going to help a lot. But genetics plays a role in that too. It's like the beak stops here. Bad joke. Move on. Animal coloration. This gets into pigments, and of course we use melanins. We've talked about bird feather colors and things like that, genetics, sex length in those cases. But as far as protection from sunlight, does skin pigment give us protection from sunlight? It does. You'll find people that have darker skin have less chances of skin cancer than people with lighter skin. High five there, huh? You see some people that look out the window and they get a sunburn, and some people live out in the sun and they have dark colored skin and they do quite well. But they actually tell you in here that if you've known people, maybe you've done this yourself. You're going on vacation, you're going to a beach somewhere, you're ready to lay out on a beach and do nothing. The last thing I want to do as a farmer is go on vacation and sweat. I sweat enough here. So that's not my ideal vacation, but so you go get in a tanning booth for a month before you go to the beach so you won't burn, right? How many of y'all done that or heard of that done? All right, they actually tell you in here that won't stop sunlight from penetrating your cells. It'll just stop the inflammation from the sunburn because you've already prepared the pigment. So you can still get skin cancer from laying out even though you've already prepared your skin for that. Technically, there's not that much protection. Now, there's got to be some protection there, or we wouldn't have dark-skinned people and light-skinned people and, you know, all the different genetic variations. But so they come out with sunblock, right? Now, back in probably your parents' days, there was sunblock, but awareness of skin cancer wasn't that great. Would you agree? Now, step in the next generation, Brenda's and I generation, our parents, you know, not going to put you in the little kitty generation here, Brenda. Our parents, there may not even been any sunblock out there, most likely not. And so they didn't sit in the house and watch TV. Wasn't a lot of TVs around. It's probably outside working or playing, or if they skipped away from work, they didn't wear a swimsuit, they skinny dipped. They had skin cancer everywhere, if you know what I mean. Nothing was protected. But what they do, what they really make a big deal of in this book when they talk about it, is that skin cancer starts when you're a child. Think about that. Now, how many children you know with skin cancer, little kids? When does it show up?
When they're older.
Older adults. Damage occurs, which the sunlight causes the damage, creates mutations in the cells, but that don't show up until you're older. You know, my dad's 74. He's been fighting the least kind of skin cancer, thank goodness, because there's some really bad skin cancers. He's been fighting it for years. But he was in that generation, there was no sunblock, there was no protection. Lord, the only time they went in the house was to sleep, and I'm not sure they slept in the house much. You know, but they didn't wear a shirt, may not have had a shirt. We've heard this story. No shoes, walked uphill both ways to school, and didn't ever make it to school. They'd climb up a tree and watch a bus go by, then go play out in the woods all day. Had rattlesnakes and copperheads hanging off their legs, but they just bit their head off. I mean, that's how tough they were. And they ate turnip greens for supper because that's all the food they had, right? You heard that one too? So they don't get any tougher than that. But that generation's paying for the skin cancer deal because we didn't know anything about it.
I met a 19-year-old girl with skin cancer.
Yeah, it can happen. Now,
She was in chemo.
and then she had the bad kind. It was a melanoma, probably. I don't remember what the kind that my dad has is called, but he freezes, the doctor freezes some of them off. I've known him to burn some of them off. He actually has cut a few out and sent them off, and they didn't come back bad. They use a salve, some kind of a salve that'll actually inflame the skin cancers. It almost like sets his face and neck and arms and hands on fire, and it brings them out, it exposes them, and then they use another salve that kills them, and then they just scab off. So he does that once a year and goes back 2 other times for freezing and burning in various spots, and there's always new ones popping up. But we didn't have the knowledge in the day, much less the sunscreen out there. And of course, now we have sunscreen and we're too lazy to put it on. So if you're a child and your mother and dad throw you outside in the sunlight without sunscreen, you know what this is doing to you. They're trying to give you skin cancer. They didn't love you near as much as they said. So they talk about all that in here, and I even underlined the part where it says, unfortunately, tanning does not bestow protection. Sunlight still ages the skin prematurely. Know anybody that religiously tans? Do they not premature age a little? It just simply says it'll age your skin and turn it to leather before it's time. You can sure see it. So, you know, we need sunlight. Don't get me wrong. Don't become a recluse inside the buildings all the time. Go get you some sunlight, because there's a lot of good things come from sunlight. Vitamin D for help calcium metabolism. All you got to do is walk across the street and get vitamin D. I mean, there's a lot of good things. Of course, look both ways before you do it. Vitamin D won't help you when the semi gets you. So I've got to be really careful in my lectures. People say, he said walk across the street. I did underline something else they said in here that's quite interesting. He's talking about all these other animals, feathers of birds, scales of reptiles. You know, a lot of animals, bear, have a lot of fur. All this protects them from sunlight. Of course, you've seen bald people get sun. You ever seen sunburn on top of the head for bald people? Yeah, or thin hair in my case. Well, they call us in here naked apes. They call. Well, you know, right then, this guy's all about we're our closest cousins, old chimpanzee and Cro-Magnon and Lucy. That's what this guy's thinking. Yeah, we're naked as far as skin protection. We have enough hair to be in the mammal category, but we don't have enough body hair to give us sunlight protection. Now, those of you that have a lot of hair on your head, you're probably not going to burn up here. The rest of you will, though, won't. We'd all look kind of funny if we was totally covered up, though, wouldn't we? Facial hair. If you had facial hair, I'd be concerned about you. So, moving on. Skeletal system. There's three types of skeletal systems. Y'all got some kind of inside joke going on.
We're all excited because we know where we're at.
Oh. Well, 651 is where I just finished. And under injurious effects of sunlight, you can read all of that. And I just talked about all that. And as you'll find, I make a lot of stuff up as I go. So now we're on hydrostatic skeletons. There's three types of skeletons. We've already mentioned the endoskeleton. That grows with us, used for various things, storehouse of a lot of things we need, calcium and phosphorus. Endoskeleton. Exoskeleton we see on a lot of invertebrates. We can list grasshoppers or crayfish or crustaceans in general. And this one's a hydrostatic skeleton, a worm. You ever seen worm get real long and thin and then thicken back up? And there's no bones in this worm. A hydrostatic skeleton is a muscular skeleton. And they use worms for an example, and they use the trunk of an elephant as an example. It's so muscular it can do so much with it, but it's a hydrostatic skeleton. And I used to have questions about that. I don't remember on my newer test if I have them or not, but examples of hydrostatic skeletons would be a worm or an elephant's trunk, or their examples. Moving on over to 652. That's where they mention the rigid skeletons. And some are way more rigid than others. If you take the shell of a mollusk, what about a clam shell? That's pretty rigid, isn't it? That's nearly hard as a rock compared to a grasshopper exoskeleton and then all the way to the inside with an endoskeleton. Look at notochord and cartilage. The term notochord will be mentioned in another chapter we're going to look at, and it's a characteristic of a vertebrate. We have to have a notochord. But what is the notochord? They use this term. What is it? Is it your spine, or is it your backbone / spine, or is it the actual nerve that runs through there, the spinal cord? Which one would you say? Give you a 50-50 shot. Is it the spine or the nerve cord?
I said spine.
It is the spine. When they say cord, we always say spinal cord, so we'd think nerve or spine. It's the spine. Notochord is your spine. And of course they list cartilage because all animals have cartilage. We'll talk about some fish that's made of totally cartilage. Sharks, skates, rays, all cartilaginous fish. So we call those, they're in a classification of chondra. It's these chondra, referring to cartilage. We have tons of cartilage. We have hyaline cartilage is our most abundant. We're going to look at that in our next lab after we get finished with genetics. So we have hyaline cartilage. We find it in nose. We find it in ears. We find it in joints. There's a fibrocartilage that goes in between our vertebrae and our back. What's it there for? Well, structure, cushion, support. It's a major component of everybody's body. And we actually produce hormones that help us make more cartilage. I wonder if those actually work because so we tend to wear cartilage out faster than we rebuild it, don't we? Because we're hard on ourselves. We wear and tear, especially athletics or athletes that they're out there beating up on joints and everything else. And then how's the doctor fix this problem? They go in there and cut out what you got. So that's in the way. We're just going to cut that. So now your joint's even more loose. And now you have bone grinding on bone, and you wonder why you have arthritic pain. It doesn't get any better. But you know, they can inject things. They can inject a synthetic cartilage in there. It doesn't last a long time, but it does help temporarily. They really love sticking steroids in there. Let's just give you some steroids with some numbing stuff. You'll feel no pain for a few days, and the steroids eat the rest of your cartilage away. That is true. Steroids will, over time, eat more cartilage. And then, you ever heard of rooster comb? Rooster comb is another injection they can do, and this stuff really works well. It not only subsides pain in its own components, but it helps replenish the cartilage. So it's very expensive stuff. How about $500 a shot? Yeah. So needless to say, not many people's heard of it because we can't afford to get it, so don't even mention $500 a shot. I'll just limp the rest of my life and they'll give me a scooter chair in a couple of years. So I understand where that's at. And then you have insurances that said, it's too expensive, we're not paying for it. And then you get special approval, well, okay, we'll give you one a year. Well, what good's that gonna do? When you need one every other month. You know, you do that for 2 or 3 years, you may not need any for many years after that, but they're finding a lot of good things from this. All right, let's look at bone. Bone is never formed in a vacant space. Never formed in a vacant space. It's certainly messed up if it does. How many bones are you born with? 306. How many do you have as an adult? That's a good answer. You do have less. It's 206. You lose 100 bones. Something's wrong with that picture, isn't it? You lose 100. What happened?
They fuse together.
Absolutely. As a child, they actually list, I think, some cartilaginous plates as bones that end up calcifying and become bone, but they start fusing together. And when they start fusing together, you ever seen how flexible a kid is? I mean, you can just take them and tie them in a bow. And they just unfold. You start putting me in a bow, bones start cracking, muscles start giving, ligaments start, the older you get, the less flexible we are. Now, that's actually a positive thing for you to do stretching exercises throughout your life. The more flexible you are, the easier blood will flow through your system, which should increase longevity, shouldn't it? You're getting waste out better and getting nutrients to it better. Flexibility is big. They've directed it straight to length of living. Flexibility. Less flexible, shorter life. More flexible, longer life. The Chiropractic Association was behind that particular one. And they're not necessarily big about stretching. They're more big about aligning, which makes a difference in itself. So, different kinds of bone. Here's replacement bone. That's going to replace cartilage. Cartilage is going to calcify, harden, and become bone. Then you have a second type of bone, intramembranous bone, which develops directly from sheets of embryonic cells, which is part of the 306 to start with, I'm sure. They just grasping at straws getting 306, but that's what they count. And then fully formed bone that's not real dense, has a lot of pores to it, a spongy bone, and it's has a lot of interlacing framework to it. And then the last, and it's probably your strongest bone, very, very dense, is compact bone, and they list it as well. And sometimes spongy becomes compact with age. Spongy hardens even more, and that's why older people are more apt to break a bone. Is because it becomes harder. Harder usually is more brittle. So, microscopic structure of bone. I'm not going to dig into this a whole lot. The next page has a picture. We're going to look at a bone in one of our labs coming up and look at a picture. If you see this picture on 654, you can see they take a section out and call it an osteon. Then they start breaking the osteon out. You have a central canal. You have a concentric lamellae. Caniculi, there's lots of caniculi. We'll point some of this out when I look at that picture, but I'm not going to dive into the major anatomy of that. I do want to spend a little bit of time with these couple different cells that play a role in how bone is broke down or put together. 2 cells, osteoclast, break down bone. That's on the right hand side of 653. Osteoclast, break down bone. And osteoblast, build bone. So these 2 cells are somewhat antagonistic. It's an easy one to remember because blast, build, there's 2 B's there. Blast, build, and clast, break down. Now, why would we need to break down bone? We might need something in that bone, calcium, phosphorus, some things we may not be getting in a food source at this point in our life. And so we break down bone to get that calcium. If you don't have calcium in the bloodstream, you'll die. Pretty simple. Muscles don't contract, you die. So why do we need the osteoblast to build bone? so we can have that calcium for later, right? So we build a lot of bone as a child. We can still build bone as adult. If you break a bone, you have to build bone to fix it, right? So we still have that capability, although it's slower, we still have the capability. They list two hormones here that are antagonistic, that directly affect these two cells. Parathyroid hormone affects osteoclast. Parathyroid tells osteoclast to break bone down and put calcium in the bloodstream. This is stuff we're talking about physiology right now. The calcitonin tells osteoblast to build some bone back. Calcitonin really tries to inhibit a lot of what parathyroid does. If parathyroid gets carried away, we lose too much bone. So we have an antagonist here, a check system, if you will. And of course, they list vitamin D, which is important for calcium metabolism to get us to lay down more bone. Takes us over to the plan of the vertebrate or vertebrate skeleton, which is on 654. We have two major components of the skeleton. This is big anatomy stuff. You're going to run across this in anatomy. I know I have a test question on this because what you want to do is understand what components fit with what. So the axial skeleton includes skull, vertebral column, sternum, and ribs. The axial skeleton includes skull, vertebral column, sternum, and ribs. I'll ask a question, and you'll have to, which of the following belongs to the axial skeleton? Recognize those. The appendicular skeleton includes limbs and pectoral and pelvic girdles. So know those. Says some early fishes had as many as 180 skull bones. Amphibians have 50 to 95. Mammals 35 or fewer. Humans only have 29 skull bones. This frustrated a lot of scientists because different age animals would have different, it'd be the same species, but a young one would have way more than an older one. They're just fusing together. So they really thought they could go find same species, different ages, and we can identify them by the number of skull bones they have. Wrong. Different age, they're fused together the older they go. So the vertebrae, we have cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, caudal. In frogs, birds, and also humans, caudal vertebrae are reduced in number and size, and sacral vertebrae are even fused. The number of vertebrae varies among vertebrates. Pythons lead the list. They have 400 vertebrae. In humans, there are 33 in a young child, but in adults, 5 are fused to form the sacrum and 4 to form the coccyx. Besides the sacrum and coccyx, humans have 7 cervical, and by the way, that is standard for all mammals, 7. I don't care if it's a giraffe or a human. Humans have 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, and 5 lumbar. The number of cervical vertebrae, 7, is constant in all mammals, whether the neck is short in dolphins or long in a giraffe. The first 2 are the atlas and axis. That allows you to turn your head. As far as ribs go, we have the protection of major internal organs here by the ribs, heart, lungs. This is a rib. They call it a rib cage for a reason. We've caged in these major organs for protection. We have frogs that we'll dissect in the lab that won't have ribs at all. Then we'll move into pigs that will have ribs. So now sloths have 24 pair of ribs. Horses possess 18. Primates, other than humans, 13. Both male and female humans have 12 pair. Although, this is an odd thing, 1 in 20 humans has a 13th pair. And most of those are female. How about that?
My mom had an extra rib.
I think that's that rib they stole from Adam and gave to y'all with it. It's a wonder we don't have but 11. All right, mark page 6:57, animal movement. Our next lecture will start up right there. Friday, we're looking at a test. Listen, if you get into that study guide and you have a question, email in the messages in the Blackboard. I'll check that daily. I may check it a couple times now, right before a test. If you have questions, ask me a question. If you don't ask, I can't answer. So utilize that message center. If there's specific questions about this class, utilize that. That's what it's for.